Good evening. I'm Milton Curry, Dean of the USC School of Architecture and the Della and Harry McDonald Dean's Chair in Architecture. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Fall 2021 Public Events Series. I want to thank the Public Events Committee chaired by Associate Professor Alvin Wang, Cynthia Pena, our events coordinator, and Associate Professor Amy Murphy, who will moderate our Q&A immediately following Craig's remarks. As part of USC Architecture's strengths is its capacity to collaborate with cultural institutions and probe the intersections between architecture, urbanism, real estate, and the arts. Our school's current collaborative exhibition of artist Latoya Ruby Frazier's work, The Last Cruise, currently on view at the California African American Museum in Exposition Park, just 5 minutes from our campus, is one example. We've also collaborated with USC Visions and Voices over the past 3 years with programs that have included major lectures by artists Olafur Eliasson and Doug Aitken. In 2018, we collaborated with Design Miami and Critical Productive Journal for 3 days of programming entitled Spatializing Blackness at the Design Miami Annual Fair in Miami Beach. And we're now engaged with the Getty Research Institute and LACMA on 3 major exhibitions on architect Paul Revere Williams, his works, as well as the urban and socioeconomic contexts in which he practiced. We value and lean into our role, not just as an architecture school, but as a producer of culture. Likewise, our speaker this evening, Craig Robbins, is no stranger to urban development at the intersection of the arts and creative economies. Craig is an entrepreneur, real estate developer, and art collector based in Miami, Florida, and is CEO and president of DACRA, the real estate development company he founded in 1987. Robbins focuses on developing creative communities that integrate art, design, and architecture to accelerate asset value creation and to enrich urban life. If you've been to South Beach, Miami since the mid-1990s, you probably have Craig Robbins to thank for the massive transformation that has occurred there. Robbins began acquiring property in the once abandoned Miami Design District almost 20 years ago. And his firm, DACRA, has spearheaded some of the most successful and transformative commercial, residential, and mixed-use projects in Miami's history, including South Beach, the Lincoln Road area, and Allison Island. Working at that time, Craig also single-handedly, to some degree, responsible for the historic preservation, in fact, of many of South Beach's Art Deco landmarks. Craig also turned his attention to the once vacant land that is now the Miami Design District, an 18 square block neighborhood dedicated now to fashion, design, and art that incorporates the work of emerging and established architects, site-specific public art, and luxury goods stores. The Miami Design District is the first LEED certified gold built version 4 neighborhood in the world. And perhaps the leading edge of Craig's thinking over the years has also been the fact that he has his ear to the ground of global culture. He spearheaded Miami's ascendance as a leading design and arts capital, first by establishing Design Miami and subsequently Design Miami Basel, design fairs that have evolved into the world's premier global forum for collectible design, but also subsequently catalyzing tremendous investment in new cultural institutions like the Perez Art Museum and the Institute of Contemporary Art in Miami. I'm interested in whatever Craig's next ventures are and his next ideas are, because I know they'll be interesting to the architectural community, the design community, and the arts community, and how he navigates the appetite for programming, even more so than perhaps the appetite for new architecture and the impending climate crisis for which Miami is front and center. And I know he's bringing some creative thinking to both of these issues. An avid collector and supporter of the arts and architecture, Robbins is also a member of the Board of Trustees of the Perez Art Museum Miami, an active supporter of ICA Miami, and a member of the University of Miami School of Architecture, Master in Real Estate Development and Urbanism Advisory Board. He's the recipient of the 2006 Design Patron Award, presented at the White House by the First Lady. And Robbins attended the University of Barcelona in 1982 and received his Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Michigan in 1984 and graduated from the University of Miami Law School in 1987. Please join me in welcoming my friend and just a great thinker and arts patron and developer, Craig Robbins, virtually to USC Architecture.
Thank you so much, Milton. It's nice to be back with you, even virtually. I want to welcome you all. I especially like the opportunity to speak to creative students because while I was not one, I had a more traditional education. A big inspiration to me was learning about art, design, and architecture. A lot of that had to do with, in my junior year, I lived in Spain and really got it had a transformative impact on me. I had the ability to learn first, and this sounds kind of weird, but you know, that the United States wasn't the only place in the universe. And to learn about cultures that were older than ours and different than ours, and to really indoctrinate myself in them, and then to learn about the power of creativity. That was a major source of inspiration. So today I want to talk to you all about that. I want to speak about the power that creativity can have and how it can, you know, impact a place. And we're going to use for this conversation the Miami Design District, the project that Milton mentioned that we're currently working on. And what we're going to do is I'm going to try to make the argument, and you guys are going to tell me if I'm convincing that, you know, about the power that creativity can have as a place builder. And this neighborhood was originally conceived. It was, first of all, a historic neighborhood, so it was conceived before we conceived it. But the transformation of the design district, when we got involved, from the beginning, we always said we wanted it to be equally about culture as it was a place to do business. And the results of that have been, you know, quite astounding. When I first started to buy in the design district, and this precedes that, it was really run down, but it was originally a pineapple farm, and it was owned by this man named Theodore Moore, who built the large building in this image in the late 20s, the Moore Furniture Company. And that sort of remains the iconic building in the design district. But when we started to invest there, the Moore building was completely boarded up. The name had been changed. The guy who owned it, this gentleman named Hammond, transformed it to the Hammond like center. It was an architecture or an antique and an art center, but really he had boarded up all the windows because he didn't want to buy storm shutters in the event of a hurricane. And so it was this like boarded up building, and the whole neighborhood was kind of sad. These were the nicer properties in the neighborhood at the time. And this was in like the late 90s, early 2000. And then something that, you know, I've always believed in, and this is true if you go to an existing neighborhood or if you want to start a new place, that one of the things that is often really disregarded is urban design. And you can see, you know, there was already a grid there. And then we studied and figured out how we could refine that grid in order to make it a really nice pedestrian-friendly area, a fun place to go and hang out, a place that wasn't only all about cars, but it was about walking, and did this kind of master plan. This plan also shows our buildings, but you could see in the center of the green area, there's this pedestrian street called the Paseo Ponte, and it terminates at the north and the south with these like beautiful plazas. And in one of those plazas is Buckminster Fuller's Fly's Eye Dome. Bucky did 3 iterations of this, a 12-foot a 12-foot one that's owned by Norman Foster, a 50-foot version that is at Crystal Waters, collected by a museum, and the 24-foot iteration that is central in the Miami Design District. And so this is one of the iconic things. One of the things that I want to demonstrate is that this neighborhood is a world-class outdoor museum of art, architecture, and design. So it's an environment, but it's also one that really, in a physical sense, reveres creativity. And what happened was, because we were making this a really amazing creative place, a lot of the world's most important luxury brands built stores there. This is the Louis Vuitton building done by Jun Aoki. But it wasn't just that they built stores, they built these global flagship stores because they were inspired not to do the kind of store you normally see, but to do something that would be really special, the kind of thing that you would find in a creative neighborhood. And lots of the brands have done these fancy stores. The Hermes building is especially exceptional. The sculpture, the relief sculpture on the right, probably about 25 years ago, I was driving and there was a guy who's demolishing an Art Deco structure on Miami Beach, and that Neptune sort of sculpture was on the building, and I asked him what he was going to do with it. He said, if you want, just come and take it. And so I took it, and then amazingly, 20, 25 years later, it was just perfect to put up on the building. And part of what we do in the neighborhood is wherever you go, there's something like that. Every 50 feet or less, there's something that is kind of iconic, whether it's a historical collectible Art Deco relief sculpture or, more commonly conventional things. One of the things you also can see in this picture, and they look a lot smaller than they are, we've put full-size mature trees on tops of a lot of the buildings, which creates this very unusual environment with all the art, architecture, and design. And then, there are a lot of the buildings in the neighborhood, like the Fendi building, they constantly are repainting the building. This is one iteration. And it becomes a place where people come, and a lot of photo shoots occur there. Even like part of the Gucci building, you could see to the left of Gucci, there's a mural. And every few months, Gucci has another artist work with them on doing new murals. So you can see that these are luxury fashion brands, but they're thinking differently because they themselves feel like they're part of a creative laboratory. This is an example of, a lot of times the brands will do their own buildings, but here's a building by Aranda Lash where there are several stores in the building, including Tom Ford, an LA resident. And then you can get a little bit of a feel of what the streets are like. In the distance, there's the first building that Fujimoto did in the United States. And that also is a building that has, more than one store in it. And it's the terminating vista of one of the plazas. You can also see on the left, Buc-ee's Dome. And that dome, you come up from the parking lot underneath and walk inside the dome and then come out onto the plaza. At the other end, also LA-based Johnston Mark Lee did a beautiful building, which is substantially blocked in this image by the trees. Part of what we did in the neighborhood, and this is very uncommon, rather than going to a nursery and buying a bunch of little trees, we actually found 30-year-old mature indigenous trees from property holders around Miami and then brought them into the neighborhood. And so it creates this amazing sensation of contemporary new architecture. It looks like a new place, but then with all of these old mature trees, it's almost confusing because it looks like it's been this way for a long time. One of the things that is a priority for us is normally the least attractive structures in a neighborhood are the parking garages, and we saw the parking garages as major art design opportunities. This one was curated by the late Terry Riley, former chief curator of architecture and design at MoMA, also a practicing architect. And so he got an artist in 4 different firms, including his, to do portions of the facade. On the left is a facade by Work AC, and then it melts around the corner into a facade by Jürgen Meyer. Nicholas Booth did the kind of art installation with the sculptures, and then Manuel Clavel put those real car bodies on the side of the building, and Keenan Riley, Terry's firm, did the last facade. But you can see the way you can take what's usually the least attractive part of places, ugly parking garages, and turn them into these iconic, creative expressions. Another one of our garages was done. The facade on the left is by Lalong Lalong, and the right is Iwamoto Scott. And then the middle is an art piece by the late John Baldessari, who was a very dear friend and one of the great influences in art of many generations during his life, and also LA based. And you can see, like, in the neighborhood on the left is an image of inside that Moore building. The first image I showed you was of the Moore building in the late 20s. And you can see it has this beautiful atrium, but inside the atrium, Zaha Hadid did a installation. Part of my experience was I lived, I was born in Miami, and the area, the Art Deco district, was this really rundown area. And as Milton mentioned, I dedicated the early part of my career to revitalizing that area. And I learned about neighborhood building and about doing these, creative kind of things. And one thing that I didn't like at the time was that Miami was known as this like fun in the sun party town. Everyone came to party. And of course, if that's your city and the identity of your city, on one hand, it's good, it's like a draw. On the other hand, it's not about substance. And I really wanted Miami to be a more substantial place. And so in the late 90s, a friend of mine and I were together, and he was the director of the best art fair in the world, Art Basel. And we just started talking, and he was really interested in maybe bringing Art Basel to Miami. And for me, that was an incredible opportunity, because it was the opportunity to really make Miami known as a city of global cultural substance. And that was a big deal to me. So I was very excited about that possibility. And I also had something to add to that thought process, because as I had initially started to buy those properties that I showed you that were looking quite unattractive in the design district, I knew that the design district historically was a place where there were these furniture showrooms. And so I had been going every year to this furniture fair called Salone, trying to get tenants to come to the design district. And I was blown away. Today it's more common, but then I don't think there was anything like it in the world. That week of Salone in Milan, the whole city was celebrating design. And so my idea was, if you took the sex appeal of Miami and the substance of Art Basel and you combine them, and then you did what Salone did, was not just have the fair, the furniture fair, but the whole city was celebrating art that week and ultimately design, that I thought that was a way to really showcase Miami. And it had an impact on the world. And the design district was central in that. It was still relatively run down. It only had furniture showrooms and a little art, but it began to give us this life. And then a few years later, I founded with a friend of mine, Design Miami, this furniture collecting fair. And the idea was that furniture at the time was not thought of as collectible. Antiques were collectible, but contemporary furniture was mass produced. And so there were a few dealers around the world that were doing contemporary design that was limited edition, obviously done differently than mass produced furniture. And so I got inspired to show side by side with the best art fair in the world, design that was on that level. And it really exploded. And it started in this space that we're looking at on the left, where Zaha Hadid did her Elastica sculpture. Each year, Design Miami gave an award for Designer of the Year. And so the first recipient was Zaha, and we commissioned Elastica. The next year, we commissioned Mark Newson, and he did this amazing fence that is on this public high school called Dash, literally Design and Architecture High School. It's a magnet school for creative high school students. And we took the fence and commissioned Mark Newson to do something. And it's quite extraordinary what Mark did. So you can see early on, at the early stages of the design district, before these luxury fashion brands came, when it was more a design place and like an art place, we were taking our resources and figuring out how to really do an amazing, global cultural platform, Design Miami, but then optimizing that and having physical manifestations of these events that were happening in Miami, like Zaha's sculpture and like Mark's fence, for example. And another one is this amazing seating sculpture by Konstantin Grichik, who is also a recipient of the award. And so you can see, like, you've got a neighborhood, you create activations in the neighborhood. Design Miami was a big activation. Participating with Art Basel was a big activation. But then out of that creative process comes these permanent manifestations. One of my favorite designers in Design Miami is the Burlak brothers. And they did this beautiful sort of shading sculpture along the Paseo Ponte in between the plazas that I was showing you. They're the designers who did the fountains for the Champs-Élysées. We do this cool thing every year. So rather than putting holiday decorations around the neighborhood, we commission designers to do design installations. And one year we commissioned Dozy Canoe to do these children's sculptures. He also had 500 sort of conceptual but beautiful bird feeders in the trees all around the neighborhood. And then, they were so successful that they became more permanent parts of the neighborhood. And of course, a great way for kids to come and play. One of, my heroes in design is Virgil Abloh. Virgil studied architecture. He then, is also a DJ. You guys probably all know him, but in case you don't, he's also the owner and designer for his brand Off-White. And he's the men's designer now for Louis Vuitton, the largest, most successful luxury brand in the world, a French company. And so he's this amazing person. He also does art. And so this Sunoco sculpture is by Virgil. And so you can see from these images, and I know that looking at images isn't the same as being there, but almost wherever you go in the neighborhood, you'll see Virgil sculpture. Behind it is the Burlak brothers fence. Shading sculpture to the left. And if you look directly behind it, you can see these arches by Daniel Toole. There's just stuff going on everywhere. When you walk in that same area, there's this amazing bus stop sculpture by Urs Fischer. It's a fountain. And you can see he took like the Miami Beach bus stop. It's a little smaller in this image, but on the bench is this skeleton. Very like hard, strong, powerful piece, not necessarily the most decorative. And behind the sculpture in these images, you see a little piece of the facade for Christian Louboutin. It's actually real tree bark. And behind it, Balenciaga's facade is made of solar panels. We do temporary installations. Here's a more recent view of the Moore Furniture Company. It's another angle than that first image I showed when it was all boarded up. And we'll commission designers to do installations, like you can see the vinyl installation on the building. We've also in the neighborhood, and this has been going on for years, but we just keep investing in culture. We helped bring the Institute of Contemporary Art. So there's a museum there. Amazingly, it's free to the public, so people can come. And adjacent to it is another museum, which is owned by a dear friend, or dear friends, Carlos and Rosa Dela Cruz. And so literally in this neighborhood in Miami, you can't really walk anywhere. It's like LA, but you can walk and see two museums in the same neighborhood. It's a nice story. At the beginning of Art Basel, Rosa Dela Cruz asked if we would give a space, and there was a space inside the Moore building where for years she would do exhibitions, and she and I co-sponsored them. And eventually, like, she was so inspired that she bought land in the neighborhood and built this beautiful museum for their collection. And then a few years later, the ICA came and moved into the old space in the Moore building where Rosa had been doing her shows, and built a temporary space, and that led to them building a museum. And you all know that it's hard to get these things done, but within a 5-year period, there were 2 world-class museums in the design district. Part of it, and I've touched upon it, is to have cultural programming, collaborations, and events. And obviously Art Basel and Design Miami are a big part of that. And what it does is it brings people. Part of the manifestation of this is that you get people, you get activities. So yes, you can have brilliant urban design. You can have wonderful art and architecture all around. You can do all those things, but you still need to program it. And part of it is the commercial side. Like if you can get people like, brands like Louis Vuitton and Hermes to open there, that's good. But then I think it becomes very commercial unless you balance it with some strong cultural content and programming. And I'm just going to quickly show you some examples of it. So here you could see early on during Art Basel, an event in front of the Moore building. And, just a lot of activity from this neighborhood. When I started there, it was half occupied. The rents were $5 a foot, and everybody thought I had lost my mind. And so you can imagine, even though this was quite a while ago, like having this kind of vitality in the neighborhood was impactful. David Adjaye, a good friend, another recipient of the Designer of the Year award, did this beautiful structure for us in 2011. And you can see, like, at the fairs, just amazing people come. Pharrell Williams and his wife Helen on the left, Brad Pitt with Patrick Sagan, Virgil Abloh with Ronan Burlick, and this guy, I don't know who he is. He's not important, standing with them. But you can see like what happens. And Lenny Kravitz came and did an exhibition of his photography with us one year. Will Smith, Rem Koolhaas, Kanye West. There's actually on the left, on the right, Pharrell performing in the design district during Art Basel one year. And all these known sort of characters come through the neighborhood, and it ties to the fact that it's a place for culture, and it's not just a place for for doing business. This is inside our offices, and you can see in the back, Urs Fischer did this sculpture that's part of my collection. It's a portrait of Julian Schnabel, but it's actually a candle. And so in the picture, you can see Urs lighting the candle sculpture of Julian during Art Basel. Richard Tuttle, another great artist, has come and lectured in the neighborhood. A couple years ago, Bono called. He hadn't done a major red auction in over 5 years. And so he asked if we would host something in the Moore building, which we did. A lot of people really made it happen. And Theaster Gates and David Adjaye collaborated with him. In literally 2 hours, we raised $10.4 million for, to help AIDS in Africa. which is, obviously a wonderful thing to do. Of course, when you have Bono hosting the auction, it makes it a little bit easier. And here's Gagosian and Deitch, just some images from a show they did inside the Moore building and other activations. We've had Louis Vuitton men's do beautiful things. Omega has done these things, and these are just a few. So the point is that I wanted to really show you and illustrate how creativity really can be a place builder, and to kind of illustrate how it's impacted me in my life. And I have to say, from my perspective, I really see design as a catalyst. So I think that art, architecture, and design, they're ways where we can invest and really make a sense of place. And these are things that I love. Like, you saw those images of Uris lighting the candle in our offices. So when we designed our offices, we worked, by the way, with Terry Riley, the late Terry Riley, who I mentioned had done the museum garage with us. And what I wanted to do for our offices was I wanted them to be equally a place to exhibit my collection of art and design as it was a place to work. And that sort of sets a tone that's very different. And I know that it's a luxury. I'm not naive to be able to have space like that and be able to create an environment that is that unusual where people can work. You can't always do that, but we're about space and about, renting space and creating spaces and buildings. And so part of defining like our culture in a very pure way was making our offices equally about art and design as they were about like workstations and desks. And that set a tone for the design district, because I think, having seen what we've done there, while we're getting these amazing, stores and people have offices and there's restaurants there, and more things are coming. We also make it equally about, investing in culture. And what that did is it made us unique and special. And so it meant that the partners that were coming there, they didn't just see the neighborhood as another transaction, another store. They saw it as this opportunity to express themselves differently. And by getting them out of their normal comfort zone and being willing to invest more, they then added to making it, to establishing this unusual sense of place. And what's happened is it's very unusual, but even despite what we've all been going through, and it's been hard for everyone, the design district sales have just continued to grow, probably faster than any other location in the United States. Like our sales and the growth of our sales. And it's not about the transaction, but it's about making something that works. And so if you think out of the box and you really focus on building the brand of what you're doing, and you do it in a really authentic way, but it still makes business sense. You're not just spending money on an ego trip. You're actually doing it to increase the productivity. The results, at least so far, and it's hard for me to believe that it could continue because, we've been very lucky. They've been extraordinary. And so the growth in sales and visitations and just the respect that the neighborhood has been, much faster and stronger. And it's become this unique place. And, you all hear all the time now that everybody is saying that retail is dead. Well, I can tell you that year to date, our sales are 100% better than they were in the best year we've ever had. And that's a crazy thing to say, given what we're all going through. And part of it is that, Florida has done okay. More people have migrated to Florida. But part of it is also just that habits are changing and people are discovering what they really like and care about. And they're appreciating this neighborhood, even if they don't know why. And, when you look at all this art, architecture, and design, there's one thing that is I did not anticipate. And this is kind of funny. I was just into, like following through with the inspiration I had from working in the Art Deco district in Miami Beach and having lived in Barcelona. But I didn't realize that if you had all of these really amazing, iconic things every 50 feet when you walked around the neighborhood, that social media would emerge in our culture. And so it's astounding how wherever you walk in this neighborhood, there's photo shoots going on. And it could be, two kids taking selfies of themselves or each other, or it could be, an Olympic athlete with a crew doing a proper photo shoot. It just became this place where everybody now also just comes to hang out and take photographs. So I thank you all for indulging me. And I know Amy has some questions. And so I'm here to answer any questions that you all have or that Amy might have.
Great. Well, terrific. We have a couple questions trickling in, but I'm going to lead on both of the two that are in to kind of contextualize them. One of the things I don't think our students understand so much is that you really are taking a district approach to development rather than the individual lot, that you didn't just go in and buy a lot and put a piece of architecture and then move to the next lot and put a piece of architecture in it and hope that catalytically those things would take off. You really started kind of quietly, even in the design district, buying property first. Really, now people sort of know your game, but originally you were really kind of very planned how you went about making sure that it was more than just a couple buildings coming to downtown Miami. Where did that notion of district development come from? I don't think they teach that in business school per se, or like it seemed, where did it come from? And it obviously has been a very interesting model.
So at first, when I lived in Barcelona that year and saw, pedestrian friendly, like beautiful city, the kind of urban grid that was there, that stuck with me. And then when I went into business, it was very run down at the time, but the Art Deco district in South Beach was a place where we weren't advocating for a building we were doing. We were fighting for historic preservation and also to bring back Miami, to bring back this neighborhood that people thought, couldn't work anymore. And one of the things that disappointed me, because we grew to be by far the largest property holder in the historical district, but we only owned a small percentage. And so a lot of the people that then came, because it became a very successful place and a hot place, they went to the lowest common denominator. Instead of like reinvesting to make it better and better, what they did was they exploited the fact that there was some success and brought South Beach down. And that was like disheartening to me because I believed so much in what we were doing. And the design district was a neighborhood, but it was smaller. It was very, very run down. And so we were able to acquire 70% of the neighborhood and therefore have the ability to control the direction. And I would say, Amy, your question is probably the most important thing about our business model. If you're just buying a piece of land and you're figuring out what the highest and best use of the land is, that's one equation. But if you own 70% of the neighborhood, and then you're looking at one piece of land in the neighborhood, you obviously want whatever you're doing to make economic sense. But if you could just make the whole neighborhood worth 5% more, that's a much bigger return than you could ever get
Right.
out of that one little building.
Yeah.
And so we are always thinking, because we're thinking as neighborhood builders, we're always thinking of how each piece will work on its own, but it will also make the whole neighborhood a better place.
Mm.
And once you go into that thought process, it really changes the equation. And that's why I was saying at the beginning that urban design is so important. It's often really disregarded, but how you set up that neighborhood to really function and work, and kind of what you codify as far as what can be done in those neighborhoods, that's the most essential starting point. And if you do that really well, then you're adding all these pieces, which could be amazing architecture, art, design. It's just one thing continues to feed each other. And you get to the point where you've got this powerful critical mass.
Great. I'm going to combine a question. First, someone's wondering just how long did either South Beach or the design district kind of take for you? And then I'm going to add the second question about, in relation to what you were just talking about, is what's your relationship to the city government? Because in a way you are acting as a city planner. You know, you're really taking a role that I think we often assign to the local government, you know, to come up with strategies for certain things, but it seems like you've really taken that on a priori or beforehand. So first, maybe the student question about just how long did those projects take? And then secondly, just your relationship to government.
So South Beach happened very quickly. I would say within a 8-year period. And I mean, from it being like a slum at the beginning to becoming one of the hottest, most iconic spots in the country. Not that it was all done, but it was on fire. It was about an 8-year process.
Hmm.
The design district has had more lives than South Beach in that sense. So there was a phase around 2000 where the year 2000, 20 years ago, where we had brought back a lot of the furniture design showrooms. We took it from being this defunct neighborhood into something that was exciting. We were collaborating with Art Basel. And so it was working economically and it was like a business success, but furniture showrooms don't bring a lot of people. There still wasn't a lot of life. And like, we had to think about how we were going to get it to the next level. And then what I was doing, which is, you know, highly unusual, but I was taking all the profits that we were getting by having rented out all these spaces to furniture showrooms, and I was investing it that week in Art Basel, and cultural programming and events and things like marketing, but marketing in just 1 week. And what it did was it brought more and more international attention to the design district. So more people wanted to collaborate with us, especially during that week. And it got my brain working. And so then in 2005, I founded Design Miami. And that was a big game changer. I mean, you know, imagine this party town inventing the most important global event for collecting design. You know, it's like coming out of Miami. If I told you it was in New York or London or even LA, you'd believe it. But at the time, the fact that Miami was able to do that, it was a really good thing for our city, and it was really good for the design district. And it led to a lot of those like creative things that you saw, like Mark's Fence and Zaha's sculpture. And so I started to realize after a few years of Design Miami that if we could get the fashion brands to come and collaborate by opening stores with the furniture design, with the art, with this whole like cultural platform, that would dramatically change the neighborhood. And it would also give us a lot more resources to do things like Bucky's Dome, the Fujimoto building, the museum garage that you saw. Like, by getting more rents and having more activity, we could then double down and invest a lot more. And part of that was in 2010, I formed a partnership with L Catterton, an affiliate of LVMH, the largest luxury group in the world. And that partnership became really dynamic. And then it led to this process that we're in now. And actually what we're thinking about is the next life, because we're going to add hotels, residential, office, other things that'll just keep feeding into this ecosystem. The second part of your question is, the city and the government has been wonderful to us, but we've also been exemplary. We've really helped elevate, our city. I would say that now this neighborhood is one of the 2 or 3 most important places of its kind in the country for these businesses. And we also, just asked the city to let us do what we wanted to do. Like, we didn't ask them. We paid for the streets. We paid for the landscaping. We paid for the streetlights. We paid for all the infrastructure. It's very unusual. Normally, like a rundown neighborhood needs a lot of help from the city, and we were able to fund those things. So I think there's enormous respect between us and the leadership in the city. It's always been very collaborative, and I think we've given more and asked for a lot less than most other people that have gone and tried to embark on these
Right.
types of projects.
Yeah, usually people are trying to leverage what they can make their profit. In a sense, it's been a kind of a different kind of model. There was an early question early on about the sort of LEED. You didn't mention it, but the one thing that's unique about the Miami Design District is that was, I believe, the first neighborhood kind of designated as a LEED, a gold standard LEED neighborhood. And could you just talk a little bit about that? And the question was specifically on those trees that you mentioned early on. Were they, did you do that just instinctually? Was that part of adding the trees to the roofs, part of that planning? Was it measured at all, or just kind of something that you thought was going to be interesting?
So there's 2 parts to it. The first is LEED certification. Our partners at L Catterton, and we just believe in sustainability. And, it's not that hard to do. People make a big deal out of things, but if you plan it well, there's no reason that every neighborhood wouldn't be done with a LEED certification. And I think for us, it's about doing the right thing. It's about just making the place stand for something that is the message that everybody should receive, and also demonstrating that it's not that hard to do. So I'd like to sit here and tell you that it was some monumental sacrifice to achieve this, but that's not true. It just took common sense. Yes, a little bit more investment, but the return is amazing because, first of all, we're recognized as being that way. And it gives us some credibility, but more importantly, we're making a positive contribution to the world. And I think everybody should think like that. That's one thing. The landscaping really came from a brilliant landscape architect who's done all of the work, Nathan Browning from Island Planning. And rather than doing the kinds of things that you see in new developments, where you get trees from nursery and you build a bunch of little hedges or whatever, he had this vision of really finding collectible trees. And so he embarked for a period of time on finding people who had trees that were kind of nuisances to their properties for whatever reason, and bringing in these 30-year-old mature indigenous trees. And, I mentioned this before, but the impact that has when you're looking at a brand new Jun Aoki building or a new building by Fujimoto, and you've got these 30-year-old trees around it, it's almost confusing because it looks like the neighborhood's been there forever. And it really makes it a lot more beautiful. They are, I think, as much part of the art, design, architecture as some of the things that I highlighted. And that was really Nathan's vision. Of course, being in South Florida, we were very focused on having shading, making it a comfortable, more hospitable environment. And it's incredible when you put in all this landscaping, how it naturally cools the place and just makes it more comfortable to walk around.
That segues into I'm going to combine John's question and Mira's question about Miami is a Latino culture, LA is a Latino culture. You were inspired by Spain. There's a lot of murals at work in your districts. Is there something special about Miami, Los Angeles, these cultures? Would you ever, do you think about like places like Los Angeles differently? Maybe I'm combining too many questions here, trying to get through them all, but is there a sense that the role of murals and shade and these kind of Latino outdoor cities, is there some common factor? Would you do something different in Los Angeles than you would do in Miami? We don't really have that historic core that you were able to activate so clearly. I mean, we do, but it's very different. What's your sense?
So I see Miami and LA as in some ways very similar. They're also different, East Coast, West Coast. Miami's more tropical,
Mhm.
LA is more arid. They're both relatively warm climates, they're the coastal cities. I think that Miami is a much more, from my experience, and I could be wrong because I don't live in LA. It's really more of an international place.
Mm.
So the Latin culture in Miami is like regarded as a major asset. The political power structure is largely Latin in Miami. A big part of the successful business establishment is Latin, and that it becomes this place where a lot of international people from Latin America, Europe, and also people from around the United States travel or come to live. In the case of a place like Venezuela, it could be that they're fleeing from, the craziness. In other countries, it's because things are going so well and they want to, travel and experience. And so really indoctrinated in our culture, and not that there aren't divisions and things to overcome, but it is this incredible, like, international place. And I think that it feels, like to Europeans, it feels more like Europe.
Mhm.
And South Americans feel very comfortable there. I remember it was the weirdest thing. So I'm American and I went to Miami Beach Senior High School, and I took Spanish, but I didn't really speak Spanish. And so Miami to me was this, English speaking culture. And then after living in Spain for a year, when I got home, I got, cleared customs, got my bags, and got into a taxi to go home. And it never occurred to me that I was still speaking in Spanish,
Mm.
because of course, a lot of the taxi drivers spoke Spanish, and I never knew that because I was an American, but and didn't speak Spanish, but I never even, like, I just didn't shift back to English. And then when I got to my house and I was like, unpacking to go see my parents, I realized, oh my God, I'm still speaking in Spanish.
Yeah.
And that was like a great revelation. So I think it's a strength of both Miami and LA that we have this Latin culture. There's obviously nuances that
Mhm, mhm.
are different about it, and it's part of what I love about
Yeah.
being in Miami.
I guess that, I mean, to one of the questions I was wondering about, because I noticed in some of the art, post George Floyd and post pandemic, and even, you talked about the nuances. You were so successful in connecting Miami. I mean, it's always, as you said, been an international city, but definitely plugging it into the international art market and the circulation of art globally. But is there a shift coming in the future about the local, about making, I noticed the Project Underline project and whatnot, that maybe it's more about the community, or you talked about what you do at Christmas. I mean, so that idea of the spaces for and expression of art of the local as well. Is that something that's coming, going to be blended in, or is it not so much part of the strategy?
We've always cared about the local. Part of what we've always done is given spaces either to local creative people or creative organizations. Like in the design district, we have the Haitian Heritage Museum,
Mhm.
and there are different kind of places. There's Locust Projects, which is this amazing you know, sort of Kunsthal type museum where it's not about their collection, but they're doing exhibitions. And so it's always, you know, we're able to do projects with people who are local, or it's not even that they're local, they're just at an earlier stage in their
Yes.
career.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be an elaborate permanent thing, but
Mhm.
they can be installations. And we set up spaces with artists and galleries all the time so they can show their work. And, you know, it's great. Like you got some young artist who's doing an exhibition in a space and they're next to Louis Vuitton
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know, Gucci. It, you know, it all like adds to the flavor of the neighborhood. We also try to have things that where it's not all expensive. So like the parking in Miami is very expensive. The
Mm.
design district has the cheapest parking in any urban section of Miami. You can self-park for 4 hours for $3.
Mm.
We could valet park for $5. And I'm not saying that those aren't consequential sums of money to people, but it's less than anywhere else because to us, we want it to be this accessible environment that appeals to people who are at different stages of life and in different positions, but share in this appreciation for creativity.
Yeah. And you mentioned that, you know, you are developing kind of a multi-layered on top of this businesses and other things that are going to come in. There's a question about housing. In a way, your first phase was really, I read somewhere that, you know, you really recognized that there was all this development out in the suburbs before, and it kind of drained the city center out in, you know, Coconut Grove and Bell Harbor and whatnot. And then there has been a growth in housing, but then it's almost, again, a place where global capital kind of like Vancouver parks itself, but it doesn't necessarily mean people are living in Miami. Is there a strategy that will be seeing about housing within the districts and things like that?
So I don't think the district will resolve what is a big problem in Miami. And that is that housing is not really affordable for a lot of people. And when you think about it, you know, Miami has locals, but then it has people from all over the world that have second homes here. And what it does is it inflates the value of all the real estate because these people, you know, by definition, if you live in another country and you're buying a place, you must have resources that are different than, you know, the average working person. Mm-hmm. And I think that is probably our biggest single challenge to figure out as a city how to create housing that's affordable for people to be able to come and get started here and not get pushed out. And there are lots of ways that I think it can be approached. A very close friend of mine is the head of a part of the University of Miami Hospital and the research center. He's the head of the whole cancer center. And we were talking, you know, because they're trying to bring in all these amazing people to come and work, but, you know, finding them housing is a real problem, especially the younger ones that they want to bring in. And I said, you know, on the campus, why not, you know, you got land, use that land and just build a nice building on the campus and don't try to make the real estate profits off of it. So if you take the land cost out and you're building the building and you take the profits out, well, that by definition gets you a lot closer to being affordable. Right. And I think, like, you know, that's one silly example, but I think that we as a community need to be innovative and do that. And the reason that I don't think the design district is a solution, you know, I mean, we could have our little piece of that, but we just don't have the capacity to build, you know, enough housing. And I think that would be one component of the ingredients anyway that would make the center part of the design district, which is what we own, like you know, a successful place.
Right. And everything that you're saying, we're struggling with in Los Angeles as well, you know, the relationship between those things. So I think it's a question that, you know, is bigger than even Miami in that way. Let's see, the other questions I think there's a question about, how does the local art scene in Miami kind of get elevated or relate to what's going on in the design district annually. I know when I was there a couple of years ago at the fair that, there were a lot of people presenting and doing other things that were in residency there or whatnot, but maybe you could speak to that.
I mean, we do all kinds of things. So we will help bring people into the community that are super talented and maybe give them space that aren't from Miami. And that adds to the local scene. We also give a lot of spaces, as I mentioned, like when we're in between and one store is moving out and the next store doesn't have their plans and permits. So we'll have for a month or two a space that's available. We
Yes.
very often give those for free to local artists or galleries that represent local artists. And so what we try to do is have a platform that is on the level of Buckminster Fuller and the Burlak brothers and John Baldessari and Virgil Abloh, but then make it so that the local artists have the opportunity to express themselves and validate what they're doing in that environment. And we've had some like really amazing installations that some of these artists have done. And what we're doing is we're giving them just, a platform to be seen and to be seen in the context of the design district.
Great. Final question. Someone just really wants to know what inspires you. I think you talked about what inspired you early on, visiting Europe and Barcelona, in Spain. But is there something, at this point in your life, you've done so much, is there something that really is motivating you today?
Well, I first of all, I work very hard, but I really make an effort to find a balance between working hard and also taking care of myself, being there for my family, also being there for me. And that balance enables me to work harder. But I would say like my single greatest inspiration is just like to be able to make my community a better place. And in my role, because I'm a business person, I'm not like the pastor. I think that it's very important to demonstrate that you can do business, that it can be profitable, even more profitable by doing better things. And so I work really hard just to make the community better, and do it in a way that makes business sense, because it's not just because I want to make money. And yeah, like everybody, I'd like to generate profits, everyone in business, but it's more to validate what we're doing. I want people to see like the return on this cultural destination that's also a business place. Even though it seems really expensive to do that, the ROI is greater than if you don't do it. And, in the retail sense, we're at a time where all these malls are in question and retail's in question. I mentioned that before. And, we're showing that if you think about it differently and you approach it differently and you're more inclusive in a lot of different ways, that you actually get a better return. It's not like charity, it's profitable. And there's nothing wrong with charity, but if you can demonstrate that it's profitable, then these kinds of things will soar.
Great. Well, I think that this is a really great opportunity for our students just to really hear directly from one of the leaders in the field. So we really appreciate the effort of coming.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks, Craig. I agree with Amy. I think it's great to see kind of the intersections that you're working between and within, and kind of mining the authenticity and of arts and architecture and culture. And it's been great to kind of see it over an arc of time, and to really commend you on the way that you've done it and the inclusivity with which you've executed all these things. Thank you so much. We will get you to LA at some point soon. Unfortunately, I say this to every lecture, but we will actually make good on it to get you here to LA sometime, because I think, again, our workshopping these ideas and being on the ground in LA would also be would sponsor another depth and robust conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, Milton. It'll be good to see you in person.
Yes, hear, hear. Thanks, everybody, for coming and join us for our next lecture coming up in next week. So have a great night.
Good
Thanks a
night,
lot.
everybody.
Good night.
Bye.